We were prepared for somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 concurrent players. We had 150,000 in the first 2 to 3 minutes of turning the servers on. That number 4x'd over the weekend, and everything melted. Like, all the servers couldn't keep up with the demand. The matchmake code we had was breaking like constantly. There's basically a virtual queue that people were trying to play the game and couldn't.
Welcome back to the Middle Tech Podcast. You got Logan Jones here, and today I had the privilege of sitting down with Wes Keltner, who is the co-founder, CEO, and president of Gun Interactive. Gun Interactive is the co-creator of some really famous video game titles such as Friday the 13th and Texas Chain Saw Massacre. They're also known here in Lexington as being one of the best investments that the Bluegrass Angels has ever made. So incredible story, not only from the company perspective, but also Wes himself. Just how he got into the video game industry is quite impressive and just a really cool story. We're also, as you can see, not sitting in our normal studio. So Gun Interactive was kind enough to let us use their space here in Kentucky to record this interview. Really grateful for this entire experience and very excited for you to listen to this episode. So before we dive in, let's just get a quick word from our sponsors. Before highlighting our sponsors, we'd just like to state that the views and content shared on this platform do not necessarily reflect those of our show sponsors. Middle Tech is presented by KY Innovation, the Kentucky Cabinet for Economic Development's Office of Entrepreneurship. KY Innovation exists to support and develop Kentucky's startup ecosystem, and we are proud to be supported by an organization whose mission aligns so closely with ours. If you're a founder building in Kentucky, you need to check out the resources that KY Innovation has to offer. You can find more information by clicking the link in our show notes or going to kyinnovation.com. All right, Wes, so I wanted to start off kind of at the beginning of your story, because when we sat down to kind of go through this whole story of yourself and of Gun Interactive, you talked about how you kind of got your start, and it is a pretty wild story. So I want to start there. Tell us how you landed this deal with American Apparel.
Yeah, so I was a junior in college at UK, and I discovered a virtual world called Second Life, and was playing around in that world, meeting the people that were building stuff in that world. And that was what was most interesting to me, was that it wasn't necessarily built by a dev studio. There's a dev studio that built the world, but the rest of the stuff that was going on were just, people in that world that knew how to code or knew how to animate and do that kind of stuff. And that was, to me, was really fascinating, because it was like user-generated content in real time. And so I was meeting the people in there and understanding how that world was working, but I noticed like the clothing options were a little limited. And I was like, hey, what if you wanted like a Nike shirt, or you wanted this or that? And they were like, oh yeah, that doesn't really exist. It's more of just sort of plain clothes. You could hire someone that could make something for you, but like there's not really any brands in here. And that's when I was like, well, maybe there should be, and because I wanted more fashion, more interesting things. So a friend of a friend had a connection in at American Apparel. They were willing to reach out on my behalf and connect me to the CMO. And we shared a couple emails. He said, you should come out to American Apparel and talk to us about this idea. I had no money. I actually had to call my dad and ask. I said, there's 2 things here. I got to get a plane ticket and a suit. And I can only afford one of those things. And he was like, all right. He's like, you go buy the suit. I'll buy your plane ticket. And I'm like, okay. And so got on a plane, flew out to L.A., walked in the front door and realized no one in American Apparel wears suits. So I felt kind of silly walking in like dressed to the nines, and everyone else was in jeans and T-shirt and sandals and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, this is going to go great. But anyway, I went to their conference room and opened up a laptop and showed them what this world was, what Second Life was, and pitched them the idea of, we could build you a store in this space. And what was fascinating about it, or at least the pitch that I gave them, was in this store in 3D, you could walk around and look at shirts and pants and stuff that you sell in your real store. And if you left-click it, you could buy it for your little avatar in the game. If you right-click it, since the game's on PC, it would just auto-load the website to that exact piece of clothing, and you could buy it in real life as well. And you could even tie in a coupon that if you bought one on one place or that kind of thing. So they loved the idea, and they sent us the blueprints to what these stores look like in real life. And they offered me, at the time, it was a lot of money, for at least for someone who's still in college and trying to like figure their life out. So it was, again, at the time, it felt like this is more money than I could ever spend or whatever, So it's pretty exciting to book that first deal. And I met with some folks that I'd already been talking to in Second Life about how do you do things. I brought them in as like a 1099 worker and paid them, pretty much cut the everything that came in half and just said, here, I'll give you half and let's make this thing. So they sent us the blueprints of what their real store looks like. One of their stores they just built in Latin America, and we built it to scale. So it was like exactly like what their store looks like in real life. And it took us probably just shy of 90 days to build. And we opened the doors, and it was around 50 to 60,000 people in the first 24 hours walked through the door. That exponentially grew to, in 1 week, over 1 million. And then we were featured on the front place of the marketplace section of Wall Street Journal, which then led to Forbes and Fast Company and Inc. And that's when my life went on a sort of a different trajectory.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
I'd say so. So this was kind of the metaverse before that word was probably even tossed around very much.
Yeah, it wasn't even that you didn't say those words
Yeah.
back then. It was just known as like a virtual world. And, the way that the Ad Age and some of those entities that were covering it, they were just sort of saying like, sort of the Wild West of advertising, some new digital way to promote a product is through this more immersive community building type of virtual world thing.
So can you take us back to the mind of a college junior, Wes Keltner?
Mm-hmm.
How did you spot this opportunity within Second World? How did you merge the ideas of, oh, this is something that's virtual that we could do an actual real life thing with it? How did you spot those opportunities? How did you have the agency to be like, I'm going to go pitch that to an actual company?
Sure. I didn't know what I was doing, and I guess I never let the phrase like, I don't know how to do that, stop me from trying something. Maybe that's just from growing up as a kid, having a good support structure in your family, letting your family give you the space to fail. I think that's important to try stuff and not succeed at it. You learn a tremendous amount from that. And, and I bounced the idea off a few, friends that I knew, and I was trying to work my way into sort of understanding marketing and advertising better, and had met someone at an ad agency in Cincinnati, and I kind of bounced the idea off of them, and they were like, that sounds, really interesting. You should keep pushing on that. And so, it was getting some feedback from some friends in the industry, but also, again, not knowing what I didn't know, and I'm fine with sort of walking into the dark and feeling my way around and being like, I'll figure it out, That's always done well for me.
Did you have any other experiences where you had done something similar? Were you the kid who set up lemonade stands or did stuff like that in school, or was this just kind of your first stab?
No, I would say when I was in college, I was working at a movie theater, and I saw this. I was bringing the mail up to. I was the manager of the projection booth, so I ran the projectors and stuff. And I was bringing the mail up, and I saw that there was something from Warner Brothers, and I was the manager was like, "Go ahead and open it. What is it?" And opened it, and it was information about a contest, like a nationwide contest for all the movie theaters could participate. And it actually may have been DreamWorks. It was whoever did Stuart Little, whoever that company is, and it was for if you participate in this contest, there's a cash prize. And I was like, "Oh, how do we do this?" And the manager was like, "Oh, it works kind of like this." And I go, "Are you going to do it?" And he was like, "No." And I go, "Can I?" And he goes, "Sure." And so I read the rules of what you're supposed to do, and they gave examples of the best way to go about it. And so I, sort of rallied some of the other people that work there, and we painted stuff on the walls, and we just got a bunch of cross promotional tie-in. When I didn't know what that term meant, but I was calling other businesses to see if they wanted to be affiliated with a project like that. And they all agreed to and donated, items to have in the theater to sort of make it look a little like the film. And so I kind of got my feet wet with that. We took third place. I think the cash payout was $1,500, and it was just put on my check, and I was like, wow. And so immediately after that, that's when there was one from Warner Brothers that came in for Tomb Raider. And so I was like, well, I'll give this one a shot too, and actually won first place in that, and that was a $6,000 payout. So I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at, I think I'm good at this. And so I guess it kind of activated a different part of my brain or something to be like, ways to promote or ways to advertise and do things, I think, in sort of real life that made people feel immersed in, how do you turn a movie theater lobby into something that looks like straight out of Lara Croft's Tomb Raider? Like, how do you do that? And I don't know. I figured it out.
Yeah. That's an addicting experience when you realize that I can do something in the real world. And, if you get something that works, having that sort of validation.
Exactly that.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs in their early days have similar stories, similar experiences, and that kind of gets ingrained into your DNA from then on.
Yeah, because it's also about baby steps. And I think a lot of folks think that entrepreneurship or being successful is something that happens to you overnight. And I guess some people have that story, but I think that's very rare. And instead it's these baby steps towards things and being okay with, like, I'm probably going to fail, but I'm going to keep trying to do this. That's something that I think others struggle with sometimes, is the thought of failing is more powerful than the thought of succeeding. And so they won't ever try to do something like that. And that
keeps you stuck.
You definitely stuck when
keeps you stuck. Well, let's bridge the story from you had your successful pitch with American Apparel. You've gotten your face plastered over the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and Fast Company and all of these big publications. I don't know how you didn't let that go to your head. I mean, I would have been like, oh, I'm hot stuff now. But bridge that into your next venture, which was, working with companies like Ford to kind of a new platform, the App Store. Let's get into that side of this.
Sure. I didn't let it go to my head, I guess, just because I'm from a small town in Kentucky, and
Campbellsville, right?
Yeah. And I still had a pretty thick accent, I think, at that point in my life, too.
That's awesome.
And so a lot of people didn't take you seriously when you had a bit more of a little sort of a southern twang to your voice. So that'll humble you pretty quick, too, when you stand out in a meeting, like how you speak or whatever. But nonetheless, that immediately led to, at this point, I'm now in my senior year, and my phone rings, and it's the ad agency that handles Ford Motor Company. They're called Team Detroit Wonderman. At least that's what they were called then. And this would have been circa like 2007, something like that. And they said, we love what you did with American Apparel and Second Life. That was really cool. We kind of want to know what the next thing is. We don't want to do the same thing they did. So while that was cool, we don't want to do Second Life. So what should we be doing? And I said, well, I've been reading about this iPhone, and it sounds like it's going to be pretty cool. And there's supposedly an app store that's being rumored. We should find out what all that means. And so we got connected in with Apple. We got a software developer kit, and we started poking at what this phone was going to be, what the app store was going to be. And that's when we discovered it was going to have a camera on the phone. And we were like, well, there's no way people are going to carry digital cameras anymore. So people are going to take a lot of pictures with this thing. And so the more we started talking with Ford and their agency, and they were telling us more about what car were they trying to promote, which was the first crossover vehicle in North America known as the Ford Flex. And the more we started understanding their target demographic, the more we all sort of landed on this concept of being able to take pictures and edit them, because we knew if you were going to have a camera, people would still want to edit photos, sort of a very light version of Photoshop. And so we started building that for them. And it took us probably 6 months to build that. Built it, C++ via the SDK, and then once the phones were available, everybody in the App Store opened up. I think we were the second automotive app. I think Audi beat us, and it was wildly successful. They had a ton of downloads. They were very happy with it. I think the Golden Globes that year, they passed them out to a bunch of stars. I remember seeing somebody shared a picture of Bruce Willis, I think, was holding like the app or whatever with a bunch of the Ford Flex cars behind him and like the Ford Flex version of the red car, whatever. It was one of those sort of Hollywood things, but that was a very successful campaign, and they were very happy with the results of that. And that just, again, was just another one of those sort of baby steps towards, what's the next thing going to be, and what is this what my career is going to become? Is this sort of new media approach to advertising.
How are you keeping up with all of this? Because it sounds like you're, coming of age for your career professionally, and a perfect time for that when you had this video game that was kind of the first metaverse to exist.
Right.
You had the App Store coming online. How are you keeping your finger on the pulse? I feel like that really hasn't let up since that time. It's just continued.
It's
to
true,
accelerate,
and that was a very much a pivotal point in sort of the digital marketplace when things started to really open up, when phones became more ubiquitous, when technology just kept getting faster and faster. Chips getting smaller, Wi-Fi becoming ubiquitous, and higher speed becoming ubiquitous for internet. Just all those things were leading towards where we are today. And I don't know. I read a lot of stuff online. I would try to consume as much information about new things that were coming out and new technologies that were coming out, software that was coming out, and how people were using them. But I kind of was just always thinking of, but is that cool? Like I would kind of think about that a lot. It was like, would I want to use that? Would I want to do that? Is that interesting to me, or is that just for the sake of some marketing thing? You know what I mean? Like you can kind of tell the difference between something that's like, that's actually genuinely interesting to, you're just trying to sell me something.
Sure.
And I think as someone who is I'm right on the edge of Gen X and millennial in age. And I think what that led to me was like, I kind of have that same BS radar that I think that the millennials sort of perfected in understanding like what's real and what's not, and when are you selling me something and when is something genuine and authentic, and that's really resonated within me to sniff that out and find out what was the most interesting thing. But I don't know that I would say that I was had my finger on some pulse of like I was this bleeding edge kind of thing. It was more like I would read about something that's interesting, do a little research, and then find what's a unique thing you could do with that.
Yeah. The way that I feel like I've experienced something similar was this realization of, it goes back to agency, of understanding your tools at your disposal and what they're capable of. Because if you can understand your tools, you can almost look at them as building blocks or ways to manipulate the world in the way that to get a desired outcome. And I think that's, whenever I talk to students at UK, that's a lot of what it's easy to say that now because AI is like the next thing that you have to pay attention to, but broader, or maybe more specific than just AI, like all the different tools that if you understand your toolbox, then that can kind of allow you to see all sorts of different opportunities that open up, which is
for sure. I think another piece of that that's important is that as a creator, you may have the eye, but you don't have the hand, if you know what I mean by that.
Yep.
And finding people that already have the hand and surrounding yourself with those people will help make a better either campaign or product or whatever the thing is, because you can't do it all yourself. It's not that. So while you may have the eye to see something and be able to connect some dots and think that's an interesting way to do it, the next most important piece of that is find the hand that can help you bring that thing to life, and then be able to define and explain it clearly so that person that's going to help you design it understands like what this could become.
Exactly. And I feel like that's super relevant coming from you because you weren't a technical.
No.
What did you
I took
college?
sociology.
Sociology.
I took computer programming to half a semester and dropped out of it.
Same. I did the same thing.
I am not smart enough for this. Like this is not my forte. I'm not good at this, which is often surprising when people talk about, when they finally, today, they're like, what do you do for a living? And I start describing it. They picture me as a coder.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't write a single line of code. Like you might as well ask me to speak to you in Latin. Like, I have no idea. and they get even more confused when you say that.
Like, how in the world did you end up there?
Yes.
All right. Well, let's talk about one of the other really interesting projects that you worked on through your agency. You mentioned being in Times Square.
Yeah.
Seeing all of I think you mentioned it was like the world's largest digital advertising billboard essentially at the time. You kind of spotted okay, this is an interesting thing to do that's not many people have done. Tell us about that. And
it was actually, so it was above the W Hotel. I think that's 46th and Broadway, if the New Yorkers can call me out if I'm wrong. But it's above the W Hotel. It was a 40-foot by 30-foot or something HD screen. At the time, it was the largest high-definition screen that had been built by man. So it was like this big, thing. And where else would you put that but in Times Square, which is like everything's over the top there. And Clear Channel Spectacolor owned, X% of most of the marketing space in Times Square, and they were the ones that had built this thing. And they had seen some of the stuff that I had done, and they reached out and said, we're building this board, or it's about to, be turned on. Is there interesting things we could be doing with this? How can we interact with it? You've done this neat thing with the Ford Flex, and you did this thing in the virtual world. Like, is there ways that a phone can talk to the screen? Can you play games on the screen? What could we be doing? So I flew up and met with them. We looked at the board. We looked at all the specs of the board. And, I think I worked with them for a few months on just sort of spitballing ideas and trying to find out things that were interesting to do with it. And, we settled on the TKTS booth, which is where you get tickets to see Broadway shows. They had just built this big bleacher system, and it was broadcasting a Wi-Fi signal. And so we were able to connect the two. So that if you were sitting there in that space and time, you could pull out your phone, connect to that, and then you could connect to the board. Which, again, we're talking circa probably '08 at this point, '09. And that felt revolutionary to the thought of your phone, because at this point we're on like what, iPhone 3 or something, and the thought of that your phone could, connect with a screen, and if you did something on the touch screen, it did something on this big screen. That was like, what?
Felt like magic.
And so we were working with them on campaigns with, like Pringles or some other ads that were wanting to do stuff with the space that was a little more interactive. Think like, like Pong or something, but instead of like the bar and the ball, it was like a Pringle can and Pringles chip, whatever, right? And it was like a 2-player. You could do like stuff like that. But they were like, what else should we be doing with this? And I was like, it would be cool to see playable trailers for video games, like maybe something that as a singular person standing in the middle of this chaos of Times Square, you felt like as an individual, there's something I could potentially do during this trailer that the rest of the millions, or I should say a few 100,000 people that walk through there every second, also like, whoa, he's doing that, like he's doing something. That was fascinating to me to think about, because that takes something that's an out-of-home advertising situation, which is more of a like impression thing. How many millions of people see it? And saying, what if you ignore that and say, what if one person does something to that ad, and to them it's a one-to-one connection moment, but other people get to see it happen, but it's up to that person. And that was the thing that was fascinating. So we started discussing that. And I said, well, step one is we should get some game trailers on this board. And so we started reaching out to game publishers, and at a ridiculously discounted price, it was nearly free to like post some of these things, to get some trailers just sort of moving in the space so that we could start to poke at it and do things with. And out of my little office in Lexington, I could, interface with this board and drop trailers on it, which was crazy to think about, that I could, see that like, oh, well, on this ad is a Gillette or Axe body spray is going to run an ad, and then I'm going to run the next Hideo Kojima game. It's like, what? That we could do that was really interesting. But so we set that up, which then I became good friends with publishers, because I was giving them space in Times Square to show off their trailers, and that created a great relationship with folks that made video games, and got me to get into a conversation with them about them saying, well, could you make our games better? Is there something we could be doing? Is that from a marketing standpoint? Is it from an advertising, or is it even like from the design of the game? What could we be doing to hit more eyeballs, get more people interested in games? And that's when the sort of next chapter of my life began, which was video game consulting.
Yeah, and you stumbled upon what sounds like the greatest company ever. You got to kind of come in, and you were sort of this connector between, as I understand it, kind of video game critics or reviewers, people that give their thoughts on the video games, and the video game developers.
That's right.
So I'm sure the video game developers wanted to get the best reviews that they could from this party, but they obviously wouldn't know what they were going to get or how they should change it until it came out.
Yep.
That's where you guys stepped in.
Yes, and that was probably about 50% of the work we would do for them, is what the industry would call a mock review. Is before the game comes out, we review it as if it's finished, and we would tell them, if you change nothing, this would be your score. And at that time, games sort of lived and died by their Metacritic score. If you were above a 70 or so, you were going to do all right. And if you fell below that, you're going to have a tough time selling the game, or even get to break even on the cost to make a game, because the cost of games were continuing to go up, but the price for the game was still remained the same at that time. So they were trying to get the most bang for their buck. The other half of the time, we would come in and play something very, very early. It would be 3 to 4 years before the game would launch, and we would be setting with the dev team, and they would be sort of formulating and working through sometimes even the paper design. We would barely see stuff working in a game, and they would want to talk to us and consult with us. What if we had this mechanic? What if we had this feature? Or internally we're at odds about this one idea, and we want to hear an outside opinion on should we spend the time and money to put this thing into the game. And so we would give feedback on that. But that created an atmosphere where I got to learn a lot about how our game's made. Because they would ask a question, we would answer, but then I might, quickly follow up too with like, yeah, but why are you thinking, or why are you doing this, or how do you do that, or what engine is this made in, and how do you make that thing look like that? And I tried to be a sponge as much as possible in those conversations, and being around other video game professionals that review games for a living, it obviously taught me how to look at things through a different lens when I'm playing a game.
Yep.
That I was looking at it, a little more objectively, and playing with intent. But you may be playing a game and say like, "Wow, this game is really fun." I wouldn't stop with that. I would say, "But why is it fun?" And I
Dissect it.
Yeah, and I would keep notes. I would get a new game and start playing it, and I literally kept a notebook next to me, and I would write down like I start with a feeling and emotion of like, this is exhilarating, and then I would come back and be like, but why? And I would kind of write about why was it doing that, and I would keep moving backwards until I got all the way down to, the main mechanic or this feature set or system that's in the game, and I'm like, it's this is what I like. I like this little thing, and then you start to see that, oh yeah, you build a game almost like concentric circles around that idea.
It's like first principles thinking almost.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's what it makes me
So I did that for 5 years and worked on some of the biggest games in the world, and it was exhilarating. It was fun. I really, really enjoyed it, but it started to get a little monotonous, where it started to get a bit more formulaic.
Yep.
And I felt like I had learned everything. Well, I should. That's a foolish thing to say. I felt like I was. For me personally, I was at some max capacity of, I think I understand this, and I think I can make a game.
You're ready to level up.
Yeah, but looking at what I know now versus then, sheesh. The Dunning-Kruger effect, or whatever the term is, where you get a little bit of information and you think you know it. No, I knew nothing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talk about, so you got to the point with your company, you're making steady revenue, you're someone that's very well respected in the space, and you feel like you've kind of gotten to your ceiling there.
Yep.
You're ready to take a risk, ready to level up, so to speak, not to throw out a pun there for video games. Take us through that decision to make that jump, because now you're totally transforming what the company does. You're now getting into game development, which is a different financial model. It's a different business model. It's different everything.
Sure.
So I mean, that was probably a huge leap of faith from there, I would imagine.
I don't think it was a leap of faith. I think it was I clumsily fell towards and foolishly thinking, oh, I can do this. I can make this game. And maybe that was some arrogance. Maybe that was, what you sort of alluded to of like things going to your head. But it's like when you start to understand how you make the sauce, you think you can go home and make the sauce, and it's going to take you a few times to get it right. But what also emboldened me was I'd spent a long time with iOS and understanding that infrastructure, and now I'd spent a long time understanding video games, and I knew it was more cost effective to make a game for mobile devices than it was to just jump straight into like an Xbox. I knew what those budgets were because I'd been talking to the people that were making those games, and what did you spend on this? Like $40 million. You're like, I don't have $40 million.
Yeah.
But the more I was understanding about building the iOS, I'm like, well, you can make a game, air quotes, cheaper than you could have anywhere else. And at the time, one of my favorite games I'd ever played was a game it's from a Tom Clancy series. It's Rainbow Six, and it's the current Rainbow Six, which is known as Siege today. Back then, there was several different versions of Rainbow Six, my favorite being Rogue Spear. And it was very much a strategy game and first-person shooter, but had strategy elements in it, and I found myself loving the planning, the tactical side of the game. But they weren't going in that direction anymore with that franchise. And I thought, well, I wonder why that's not a thing anymore. And the more I started thinking about it, I thought, well, an iPad is the perfect environment to touch, to strategize, to create a game like I wanted. And so I immediately met the creative director that had made that franchise from Tom Clancy, and he had just left Red Storm, who was the dev that made those games. And I started talking to him about it, and he got really excited about it and was like, yeah, man, I want to help. I want to join up. And I was like, cool, time to start raising some money because I can't fund this by myself. And I met a few local investors in Lexington and pitched them the idea of what I was trying to build. They believed that I could do it and put some other investors in the room for me, including the Bluegrass Angels, which is a group here in Lexington that is very active in funding entrepreneurship. I'm now currently an angel myself, so it was nice to move through that. But shout out to those guys because they also believed I could do it. They took a risk on me, who's someone who's never made a game. They gave me just shy of $1 million, and I found a small studio in Raleigh, North Carolina that had some experience in iOS as well. And I worked with them every day for nearly 2 years designing this game. When we were moving from paper design to the actual production, a gentleman named Robert Bowling had just left Infinity Ward, and when he was brought on during the transition from Call of Duty being a World War II game to Modern Warfare. And he was an integral piece of that, especially in the RPG elements of perks and the things that you get like in the game. He was very much a champion of that internally at Infinity Ward. And he's ex-military and just had a good head on his shoulders. So I brought him in to help me as well. And he loved the idea so much. He's an investor in my company.
Well, he was a Northern Kentucky guy, right?
And that's the connection. Was I kind of done a little digging on him and found out that he's from Northern Kentucky. And so when I reached out, he was like, yeah, like I come back a lot. And I was like, well, next time you're in town, let's get together. He's like, I'll be back next week. And I'm like, where do you want to meet? And he was like, exit blah, blah, blah at the White Castle. And I'm like, what? He's like, well, I live in LA now. We don't have White Castle. I want some. And I'm like, okay. So it was like a Wednesday night, and I met him at a White Castle at 8 o'clock at night. We split a 10-sack, and on a napkin we were drawing out, like, what is this game? And that was like that connection with him. And so, yeah, we spent that money. We spent a couple years building that game, and we launched it in the App Store. It was called Breach and Clear. It is a military tactical type game. We actually worked with Special Operations Forces folks from around the world, including Canada and SAS, and as well as the folks here in stateside, from the CAG to SEALs to Rangers. And we even worked with the guy who teaches what's called Spartic training, which is kind of like getting your masters in room clearing, like that. If you've ever seen the guys that stand outside a door and there's like 5 guys in a line and they go breach, and they come in the door with guns and they do all that crazy stuff. It's the guy that teaches that. So we had him like as a consultant on the team, and we would draw out, like, we met in this bar at, just outside of Cary, Raleigh sort of area, North Carolina. We had graph paper, and like I and like 2 SEALs, and we would sit and draw out these scenarios on graph paper of like, what if the room was shaped like this, and here's where the bad guy is, what would you do? And they would show all the
That's so cool.
And then we took them into the motion capture volume.
Oh, wow.
We put the little dots all over each
yeah.
other, and it was those guys, and we had them all kitted out like they would if they showed up to a real war scenario, and they would go through all those movements. And it was crazy. It was a very surreal moment. And what was funny is we started to shoot that, and we realized no one in the room had ever directed motion capture. So we had like a few devs, myself, a creative director, like a bunch of people in the room, and then all the guys are ready. The cameras are spinning up, and they're like, okay, and the actors just standing there with their like, airsoft guns. They're all kitted out in camouflage, and they're like, what are we doing? And I'm like, I guess I'm a director now. So I had to like step in and learn how to be a director, which I'm sure I did poorly, but we got all the data. And so we launched that game. It was, again, a successful game. I think we did 4 or 5 times the cost to make the game. And that's when I shifted my attention to another passion I have in my life, which is 80s slasher movies.
Before we get into some of the other games, a component I was really interested when initially hearing your story was the funding mechanism around games.
Sure.
And so when you first raised this capital, and maybe we can compare and contrast when you raised capital on down the road, was this funding Gun as a company?
Yeah, it was equity.
Okay. All right. So you raised an equity round.
Yep.
We can just kind of hold that there until we talk about how you raised
Sure.
later on, because I think there's just like an interesting kind of compare and contrast there. So yeah, go ahead and take us into developing the next game,
Yep.
which was around some different IP, but
Yeah.
tell us how that.
Sure. Ronnie Hobbs that works with me, and Ben Strauss that also works with me as well, and they're still here today. we were constantly discussing that the elements that make a slasher movie would work in a video game if it was multiplayer. And we've been talking about that for a very long time, years and years, but there wasn't like home internet speeds weren't where they needed to be. And it would work for shooters because shooters are arena based. It's just like a small play area,
Yep.
Think like Halo, that kind of thing. But to make that bigger, it's not possible. But we finally kind of hit that mark where I remember reading some study about in the States, like how many households had at a minimum, like, between 5 and 10 meg internet. And it was over half. And I'm like, oh, that's for me was what I needed to hear. And so we'd come off the success of Breach and Clear and we started the paper design of a game called Summer Camp. And it was going to be an homage to 80s slashers like Friday the 13th. There was another one called The Burning. It's just that idea of teens, young adults goes to a camp and there's a killer there, right? It was that kind of idea. Because what makes those movies scary is the isolation of it. Like you're out in the middle of nowhere and you can't really get away and there's someone there. And that was the thought process of the design of that. And I've always loved the Friday the 13th film series, so I started reaching out to the people that were affiliated with those movies. The first person to sign on was Kane Hodder, who played Jason in the movies. So I was like, oh, I'm getting the guy that played Jason. We'll just make a new killer. This is going to be awesome. And then I reached out and got Harry Manfredini, who was the composer from the film Friday the 13th. So now I had him on. He was going to score music that was sort of sounded like, but not the same thing. All unique, all new, everything. And then lastly, I got connected in with Tom Savini, who was a practical effects, guru who made all kinds of monsters and films, including he'd done one of the Jason films. So I was kind of putting all these folks together. I've met a studio based out of, at the time, they were in Denver, Colorado. And I pitched them, kind of talked to them, what I was trying to accomplish and what budget I wanted to set for the game. And this was, again, cheap, sub $2 million to make. And they liked the idea, and they're like, yeah, it would have to be a small game for that price, but we can get something going. And so we immediately made a little kind of beauty corner, we call it in video games. You just kind of make one area look nice. We took some screenshots, and I was like, I just want to know what's the market think about this. Do they want this as bad as I do? I think people would want to play this. So we made this little cheesy trailer. We put out some screenshots. IGN, the website, ran the story. And within a week, my phone rang, and it was the rights holders to Friday the 13th. And they're like, hey, we like what you're doing. What if you were to just make this Friday the 13th? And I can be honest with you, in full transparency, the first correspondence I had was an email from them. And I thought it was somebody trolling me. I thought it was somebody I knew that was because people knew I liked that series. So I'm like, I'm going to find out this is Ronnie that works for me. Somebody here is trying to, and so I literally deleted the email.
No way.
Swear to God, hand to God, I hit delete on the email. I was like, that's real funny, delete. And then another week or so goes by, and this time it was a phone call. And I was still sort of thinking is this real? Until then, I heard the voice of, Sean Cunningham, who owns Horror Inc. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is the real deal. And so after, freaking out about that for, several hours, we got together and got a licensing agreement put together. And a few months later, we announced that Summer Camp's actually going to be Friday the 13th. We took to Kickstarter. We won some kind of Guinness thing for fastest to $1 million or something like that was raised on Kickstarter ever. Things were on the upward trajectory for sure. People were excited about it.
So was the main fundraising for this one the Kickstarter campaign? Did you go back to?
I had to go back to investors still because we knew that a $2 million budget wasn't going to get it done. Even with getting another $1 million on Kickstarter, that's not going to get it done either. And so we needed to raise more from the local investor scene. And that's when we kind of took a page out of how do you fund films? And we thought this could actually work pretty well in video games as the same way is you're just going to buy a royalty into the game. You give me whatever the number was, $100,000 gets you 1 point, whatever the terms were. And that's how we raised the rest of the money that was required to make that game. And we did a little small beta that was open to a few people in the public, and we kind of got some understanding of interest in where we thought the game was going to land, and we prepped the servers, and I even doubled the number of what we thought we needed, and then we launched May 26th of 2017, and that's when my life changed forever.
So a couple things there. I think that's a good little cliffhanger to hang out at it for a second. I want to hit on the fundraising thing just to emphasize that. That seems like that would align investors and the founder. Investors are, their risk is only on the game. It's not necessarily the entire company.
That's right.
And then the investor doesn't have to give up equity, the founder doesn't have to give up equity in the company.
Correct.
So just wanted to kind of call that out as an
and the other
funding.
It is riskier because you could put out a flop and you don't make any money.
The game just totally doesn't
and you don't have any equity either now. Like
Okay,
you just gave me
true.
money. But the other side of that is the horizon towards a perceived exit is way faster. It's not put equity in company and in 5 to 10 years they may get bought or something happens where there's an exit and I get like a 10x return or some crazy number happens. This is you put money in, and if the game is good and comes out, like the horizon for you to not only get your money back but start making profit is exponentially higher in a shorter time frame than it is if you did an equity play.
So the equation balances out. You're willing to take on more risk for a shorter
That's right.
time horizon. All right. So take us back to launch day. You've done all this prep.
Yeah.
Your fingers crossed. You're hoping the game's going to do well.
Mm-hmm.
Put it out in the world. What happens?
We were prepared for somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 concurrent players. We had 150,000 in the first 2 to 3 minutes of turning the servers on. That number 4x'd over the weekend, and everything melted. Like all the servers couldn't keep up with the demand. The matchmake code we had was breaking like constantly. There's basically a virtual queue that people were trying to play the game and couldn't. We didn't sleep for the first probably 10 days that the game was on the market because we were. I try to explain this to people. I'm like, it's like if NASA fired a rocket, right? And you are approaching, you're not quite in orbit yet, but things are going okay, and then they don't. And you would have to climb out on the rocket and wrench it while it's still going. That's what it feels like whenever you have, a game that is successful in terms of the player base. There's a lot of people that are trying to play it. But the fact that there's so many people playing it, you weren't prepared for that, and it's breaking things. And so you have to roll patches as fast as you can. So if the sun rarely set on development, there was constantly somebody working, trying to fix the things that was not able to keep up with that level of demand.
I saw a funny tweet from somebody that I follow on X that advises consumer apps and tries to help them go viral. And he's like, when an app actually goes viral, there is a company-ending crisis every 3 hours. And I'm sure that was the same thing when you get a video game that is just taking off. You're trying everything you can just to keep that rocket together to get it on up into orbit.
It's true. And, it's because of all the hands that touched it and all the different input that went into the game. The game was fun. And it's the only reason why people were willing to stick around and put up with stuff that would, the server not working appropriately or whatever's going on. Like, it's because it was fun. And so we knew we had that, and we just had to keep wrenching on it until we got it right. And it was a solid 10 days of misery.
And that wasn't even the only hurdle that you had to cross with this game.
Yeah.
What happened on down the road?
Yeah. So just after barely even I don't think we were quite a year old, the entire IP went to court. So that, by order of judge, we had to stop putting anything into the game. We weren't brought to court. We weren't in any kind of affidavits or any kind of legal documents. We were just told, hey, nothing else that's related to Friday the 13th can continue. You have to stop until there's a ruling, like to find out who owns what. And that's kind of a bit of a downer whenever you've got a successful multiplayer game and you need to be building and putting stuff into the game to then be told to stop. We were already setting on a lot of content that wasn't quite finished yet, but we had already invested to build it, and that had to be shelved, and that was hard. But it was the most difficult thing is trying to explain that to the millions and millions of people who are playing the game, and they're not lawyers. They don't. That's just not what they're and right. And trying to explain it to them, it's kind of difficult to explain what's really going on behind the scenes. But it was in the press. It was covered by major entertainment publications, and so it was like, well, here's a link if you want to figure out what's going on. You can go read about why this is the situation. It's the same reason why you can't go buy a T-shirt right now that has the hockey mask on it. Everything is stopped. It's why the last movie was 2009, and there still hasn't been a movie. If you think about that, it's crazy. So yeah, that was a pretty dark time to go through.
I bet. Well, back to the investment piece of it. You've gone through all of this. Talk about the return that was generated from this. I mean, this was a massive, massive success despite
it was
kind of getting halted. I mean, you didn't have to stop selling the game, I guess. You just couldn't put more stuff into it.
That's right.
I mean, yeah, give us a shot of how successful this actually was.
The investors were pretty happy with it. They were in the double-digit X multiplier for what they put into the title. We hit around, I think, 15 million players worldwide or some ridiculous number. It was a very successful title, and everyone that invested in it, they did very, very well. Yeah. And we're really excited to hear the next thing. Yeah,
and I believe you said that it was one of the highest returns of any investment that the Bluegrass Angels had made at that time.
It was. I don't know if that's still true today, but at the time, it was a pretty big windfall for them.
And I'm sure they're even more excited when you said, okay, I've got another idea.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you've had this big success, and now it's like you found something that works. That's the interesting part about video games is you can go and people are always wanting a new video game.
Sure,
so
and it's
got a formula now.
Also important to sort of find that niche and find an area that you feel is somewhat underserved, or an area that if you're good at it and you're passionate about it and it's underserved, that's pretty strong place to be. And that's what we felt was happening. Was there's people that like horror, but most horror was single player experiences, which is fine, and those will always remain. But if you wanted to play with some friends or you wanted to have a multiplayer experience and be scared collectively, just like the reason why horror movies do well in movie theaters is because you collectively want to scream and then laugh at the fact that you got scared and so on and so forth. It's the same thing in a multiplayer space, and so, but it was very underserved. There weren't at the time. There was one other game, so it was like, well, this marketplace is wide open right now. And that's when, after the fact that Friday had been out for probably nearly 2 years at this point, and whenever we got the call from the rights holders to the Texas Chain Saw Massacre.
So it's just like another iconic slasher film. I mean, that's just. Was it immediately like, all right, let's load it back in, go again? I mean, was there even that much different that you had to do, or was it just
no?
There
was actually there was a little bit of apprehension when we first started to talk about it because that film was released in 1974.
Okay, yep.
So that's a long 50 years ago. It's like, is there an audience right now that still? I mean, obviously people know that Leatherface. They know the crazy guy with a chainsaw. But we were like, is this? It meant a lot to cinema. That first film did, and it's often discussed in the top 3 greatest horror movies ever made. It's probably like Exorcist, Shining, and Texas Chain Saw Massacre, just because of the impact it made to cinema. But we're like, does that translate well to a game? And that was a film about 3 crazy cannibals that live in the family. While Leatherface became sort of the poster boy, that first movie isn't necessarily about Leatherface. It's about the family. And we knew that was going to be a significant hurdle to overcome because we started seeing a lot of games similar to Friday the 13th coming on the market. Singular killer, group of kids trying to get away from killer. Just change up the setting. This one's in a school gymnasium, or this one's in a graveyard, or whatever, right? We saw a lot of that. But we saw this as this can go one of 2 ways. We're either going to fall on our face pretty hard because we're changing the formula of what makes these games successful, or we're going to push it forward, right, through this type of innovation, which was, how do you take the term we use is asymmetrical horror. Asymmetrical meaning it's we're not on even grounds. You know, if I'm standing here with a baseball bat and you're Jason Voorhees, it's not equal grounds, right? Like, you're going to kill me. And that's what makes an asymmetrical game an asymmetrical game. Call of Duty is a symmetrical game, right? You have a gun, I have a gun. We can do the same thing. It's whoever shoots first, right?
Yep.
So how do you take something that we helped bring to life in the video game world, the concept, the idea of asymmetrical multiplayer horror? If we were one of the ones that put our stamp on that, I don't want to just do the same thing again, right? So how do we push it forward? And that's when the first thought of apprehension about working with Texas Chain Saw was actually the motivation as to why we should do it, because it was the harder choice. Because I said no to probably 10 other films that came to us, because the success of Friday was so undeniable that Hollywood kind of came calling and saying, do you want any of our films? And nothing quite seemed to fit. Everything kind of felt like, well, that's kind of going to be the same thing, And that was the one that we saw as like, okay, this is the way we can push this genre forward and be innovative and not just be, let's just rinse and repeat. Because trying to have 3 killers on the screen at one time, that was hard, very hard to do for balance. That's the most difficult part, and it's supposed to be perfectly imbalanced. That's actually how you balance an asymmetric game, because you're supposed to not be on equal footing, but you still have to balance it enough to not feel like it's so overpowered you don't have a chance.
And this game turned out to be a massive success as well.
It was, yeah. It launched August of 23, and we were selected to be in Game Pass, which we were excited to be in. They took care of us financially, before the game even came out, and that was great for all my investors. We did a similar model, so they were very thrilled to be where they were before the game even came out. And then that Xbox through Game Pass put a lot of bodies in the server for us, so to speak. We had a lot of players turnkey from day one. And we shot up pretty quickly past 3 million people playing the game into 4 million, and continued to grow since then. We've also took place in the PlayStation Plus promotion, which was a similar thing to Game Pass, and that put another large amount of players into the ecosphere of Texas Chain Saw. And we spent a year putting as much content as we could into the game, because we only had the rights to the first movie. And so there's sort of a limitation to how far you can go creatively with that before it also starts to feel like you're doing the same thing.
Yep.
So we wanted to keep everyone in there feeling unique and different and interesting. So we took that out as far as we could, and then we said, okay, creatively, this is the vision we have for this game, and now we're moving on to the next adventure.
Super cool. Man, as I kind of reflect on this entire conversation, I would love to pull out a couple themes that I kind of heard, and just as we summarize what we discussed and close things out, the first that I feel like I really picked up on was you seem to have a skill for surrounding yourself with the right people. Like you mentioned, that you're the creative, you kind of had the hand that was able to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I have a particular question about that, but I just think that that's such a important skill to have. You mentioned communication being a part of that. Mm-hmm. Just in terms of going and actually doing big things, you have to be able to work on a team and be able to assemble the right people. It just seems like that was a theme throughout your career, was you were pulling in people that you brought them as 1099s. They were working on other video games, and you just surrounded yourself with those people. So I think if we could pull out any advice for young people that are going through school, I feel like we kind of have this, at least there's the stigma of young people not being as great of communicators. So maybe if we can just kind of linger on that topic for a second of what your advice would be to young people, or how you would advise your kids to kind of cultivate that same sort of trait within themselves.
Sure. I mean, I don't know if I'm always going to be the best person at giving advice about things, because I'm still trying to figure things out, all the time. But the part about, surrounding yourself with people, I think for me, it was pivotal to my success. And I find that the best thing to do for me was to try to be as clear as I can on what the idea is, but then leave room for their own don't give them the clay that's already formed. Like, kind of point them in the direction and then let them start to put their own creative fingerprints on things. And then support that and nurture that. And you'll be surprised at usually what comes out the other end of that. And then when it does happen and it's successful, you push them to the limelight. And because that you didn't do that. I didn't do any of these things. We did these things.
Yeah.
I couldn't singularly by myself sit in my little apartment and just be like, I'm going to do this. Just because I had the idea, and I was at the time ignorant enough to think I can figure this out, right? And simultaneously being okay with, well, if I fail, I fail. That kind of energy that you bring to it can inspire some. Others, it may terrify them that they're like, you don't have this figured out yet, like, and you're like, no. But that's, to me, where I feel the most excited is we don't know. We're cutting a path here that no one's walked before. Let's figure it out together.
Yeah.
And then when those little mini successes happen, like, you got to celebrate them and lift the team up that built it, because you're not anything but some other guy with some ideas. There's people got ideas all the time. It's how do you execute on
It's
them?
the execution. I think that's one of the best parts of the human experience, is getting to create alongside other people, getting to kind of have that synergistic sort of experience.
100%, because you have so many blind spots that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I wanted to pull out before we wrap up here is you have the skill for kind of paying attention to what's coming down the pipe and taking it, throwing a dart at the board, seeing if it hits. You had a lot of darts that landed, but you didn't know that they were going to land at the time. I'm curious, in today's landscape, you've got AI that's kind of burst onto the scene. Obviously, that's changing a lot around video game development and just spatial computing in general. I'm curious if there's anything that you're paying attention to, or that can be as broad as an entire industry that's popping up, ways of developing technology stuff. I'll let you take it wherever you want.
Sure. I don't think it'll ever replace. I sat in a lot of meetings with game designers, and these are not always people who write code, right? These can be like the creative thought of, you're starting with a dry erase board, and you're just saying, yeah, but what is this game about? And you don't usually start with like, it's a fantasy setting. Like, no, it's when I mentioned earlier in the podcast about playing a game with intent and then moving backwards through the why do I feel this way to get down to this singular little thing where it's like, oh, I like that.
Yeah.
It's starting there on a dry erase board with this. This is the gameplay loop that I think is fulfilling, and I like this. And others go, oh yeah, I played a game that this, and everything. And now next thing you know, you've got another sort of ring around that. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And then, right? And it's being in that collaborative sort of environment that, I don't know, that's not something AI can do yet. I guess I should specify yet. And I would be pretty scared if we got to that point where that is what it is, because right now, I don't, to my knowledge, it can't produce an original thought. It's like all based off something that already was. And there's already enough people in the world that do that just sort of copy what already exists. So it's those people that probably should be the most terrified that AI is coming, it's going to replace your job. It's like, well, if you're not doing anything truly unique that's never happened before, yeah, you're probably going to be replaceable.
Yeah.
That's still scary to think about, but in our field, I'm seeing more people embracing it similarly to when Photoshop became a thing, or Creative Suite became a thing, or Unreal Engine became a thing. These are all tools that you need to use that can speed up things that normally used to take you a long time to do. Even like compiling code, writing code. There's already little modules that are grabbing stuff from GitHub and helping you make your code more efficient. That's not necessarily AI, but it's almost like spell checker for your coding. But you can see how this moves in a direction towards getting to the point where AI is just kind of helping you do that for you.
Yeah.
writing things more efficiently. As you start to write something, it looks like you're writing, matchmake code for a multiplayer game. Have you thought of this? Have you tried this? Can I go ahead and take the wheel for a second? And you're like, yeah, because you still have to understand like what it is that they're making, and you still need to have your own creative input into if it's code for that example. But even in the design space, like I may hear that artists are using, like for mood boards, whenever you're first starting out, like what is the game? What does it look like? What's the environment look like? They may be throwing, and it's not necessarily prompt based. It's more interactive than that, where you're pulling from, because before Midjourney or any of the things that are out there in the world that people use for AI, before that you were scouring things like Google Images or ArtStation or like tons of other pieces of art, even what in sometimes our industry we call a rip-o-matic, which is like you're taking scenes from movies and you're stitching them together in a non-linear editing like Premiere or something. And you're dropping all these things in to kind of make a trailer, a feeling of like, what is this game supposed to look like, feel like? What's the pacing? When the hero walks into the scene, what's that supposed to feel like? And you're stealing, borrowing from like tons of other things that already exist, just so that collectively as a team, everyone goes, I understand what this is supposed to be. And if AI is a tool that's being used to help us get to that point, that's a tool. It's what it can't do and what it shouldn't do is then take over at that point and become something more, because you're never going to get something that's truly innovative or unique or has a throughput voice that feels human and really resonates with human emotion if it's being something, because all AI can do is look backwards. It's something that already exists. And until it can look forward, it's not ever something that I'm necessarily worried about.
Yeah. Something that can enhance the creativity. It can enhance the speed at which the hand moves, as you kind of reference. You got the creative side and the hand that kind of drives things forward.
That's right.
I think that's the important framing that everyone should keep with AI. Like even a college student, when you're trying to write an essay, do not go and have the ChatGPT write your essay. Work alongside of it. Incorporate it into your process, but don't rob yourself of the process, because that just steals that's your whole point as a human. Like, be the creative. So I think that's a great way to position it, and very well said. Well, it's been such an awesome conversation, and it's awesome.
Well, thanks for inviting me, by the way.
Of course. No, this was a really fun one. Thank you for letting us use your studio. This place is the coolest place we've ever recorded, for sure.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
But yeah, before we let you go, any hints around what's coming next for you guys? Anything that you're willing to share?
Yeah, we'll be announcing, really soon, the next few months, kind of what the next project's going to be. But it's something that I hold near and dear to my heart. It's one of my sort of bucket list things to work on, and I can't really give you a whole lot more than that. But I think fans are going to love what we're doing.
Sweet. We'll leave it on a cliffhanger. Well, I'm glad it's happening here in Lexington, Kentucky. And yeah, thanks again, Wes. It was an awesome conversation.